You're listening to Maximum Medicine Radio with host Doc Martin. Stay tuned in or call in. You won't want to miss what's happening next. How do you step into your maximum potential? How do you connect your spiritual drive with your physical path? Stick around as Doc Martin takes listeners on a journey through the seen and unseen, the accepted and the unbelievable. Get ready to meet the maximum you the world needs on Maximum Medicine Radio with Doc Martin now. Hi, everybody. I'm Doc Martin at Maximum Medicine Radio, and I'm joined today by Dr. Stephen Taylor, who comes to us from Manchester, England. And I'm just going to digress for a minute and just remind everybody that what I love, well, I love the idea of spirit, but what I really love is you can find spirit in transcendent ways. You can go to the mountains of Bhutan, the temples, you can sit in an ashram, you can go on a vision quest. But what I love about it is when I have guests who bring that into our day-to-day world. Because when we bring spirit into our human experience, that is so enriching and really propels us to be the best that we can be. And I'm going to sound like a broken record, but boy, do we need to bring our best game, because the world right now, in many ways, is crazy, Looney Tunes. So what Dr. Steve has done as a lecturer at Leeds University, as an author, as the past chair of the transpersonal psychology section of the British Psychological Society, he really, really walks the walk that he talks. And he's written many books, and we're going to talk about a couple of them today. But Steve, I'm so happy you're here. Thank you for joining us.
Me too. Thanks, Sharon. Great to be with you.
What I love, and I want you to take us on a little conversation, if you would, for me, when I look around, the things that I rail against in mainstream medicine is the strict adherence to, if we don't have scientific proof, it doesn't exist. And I studied shamanism, studied energy medicine for about the past 25 years. And the role of the unseen world, of the transcendent, of the things that we cannot do a controlled, double-blinded study about, that's powerful stuff. And yet I can't prove it if I'm talking my science talk. So I'm always fighting against, or help really rattling the cage of the materialism world. So talk to me, because that's what you do in your books, in your life, is bring a new view to kind of shift us out of that dogmatic, rigid, quite frankly, boring materialism world. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I've always sensed that there is more than than the physical, and I've always kind of felt that modern science was too limited, and that it ignored many phenomena which it can't seem to explain. And even worse, it tries to explain away things that it can't understand, like spiritual experiences, psi phenomena. And there are all kinds of strange states of consciousness, like near-death experiences, spiritual experiences, which I've already mentioned. And I was always amazed when mainstream scientists would try to explain these experiences as hallucinations or the result of aberrational or abnormal brain activity. So yeah, I always sense that there's more than we can perceive with our normal consciousness. And I always felt that it's very arrogant of human beings to believe that this is reality. The physical world is all there is. We are just biological machines. We're nothing more than collections of genes who are innately selfish and all that kind of thing. I always sense that that's not true, that it's a narrative. And also it's a belief system in itself. a lot of mainstream scientists believe that they are, non-religious, they're atheists, and they may well be atheists in a religious sense, but they have their own belief system. In some ways, it's just as religious as any fundamentalist religion. It's made up of assumptions and beliefs, which, when you look closely at them, are not based on fact. They're just as dogmatic as fundamentalist religious people.
And when you have things that, and I'll take this from the realm of healing and patients' experiences in overcoming serious health challenges, when they couldn't show it based on the time they knew DNA would replicate and upregulate the genes, then we had to say, oh, well, it's an epigenetic phenomena.
Yeah.
Then we'd have to say, oh, well, there are molecules of emotion, but something's happening. And yet there is so much power to be had in this transcendent realm, isn't there?
Yeah. It's important to remember that there are different kinds of evidence too. I mean, according to one of the tenets of mainstream science or physicalism or scientism, whatever you want to call it, a phenomena can only be proven if it's demonstrated under laboratory conditions and in double-blind experiments and so forth. But that's there are lots of phenomena which are not conducive to those conditions. Like psi phenomena, for example. I think it's proven beyond a doubt, for example, that precognition and telepathy exist. And
Mm-hmm.
there is some evidence from laboratory experiments that they exist, but laboratory experiments only tend to show a small significance in precognitive or telepathic experiments. But there are all kinds of like case studies, other kinds of evidence where it is proven beyond doubt that precognition exists. But I always think that these phenomena, they are like gifts. They're not regular human
Mm-hmm.
experiences. They're gifts that show themselves under certain contexts or conditions. But they can't be reliably demonstrated. Like for example, it's a bit like the ability to compose poetry or music. Only a few people can demonstrate this ability regularly, but not everybody can demonstrate it. Well, very few people can demonstrate it in a significant way under scientific conditions. So yeah, I think we need to broaden our assumption of what evidence is to embrace a wider context.
And you talk about, excuse me, in your book, Spiritual Science, you talk about the value in incorporating a spiritual perspective into our current scientific reality. Can you talk more about that?
The essential problem with physicalism or materialism is that it doesn't explain the world very well. There are all kinds of phenomena which don't really make sense from a physicalist position. Like even consciousness itself, it's not really explicable in physicalist terms. Scientists have been trying for 30 years or more to explain consciousness in terms of brain functioning or brain
Mhm,
processes,
mhm,
but they've got absolutely nowhere. Last year, the scientist Christoph Koch handed a case of wine to the philosopher David Chalmers because in 1998 they made a bet about whether consciousness could be explained in terms of brain functioning.
mhm.
And Christoph Koch admitted that it hadn't been explained after 25 years of research. In fact,
So he lost the bet.
he lost the bet, yeah.
Mhm.
And, I think a lot of scientists and philosophers are realizing now that consciousness cannot be explained in brain functioning. You have to look elsewhere beyond the brain for an explanation of consciousness. And there are
Can
many
you
phenomena.
can you
Sorry.
explain what was David Chalmers' theory, or what did he propose?
His theory is quite similar to mine, actually. His theory is that consciousness is something fundamental in the universe. So you can't explain it and you can't reduce it to other factors or laws because it's
Mhm,
a fundamental thing. He compares it to gravity or mass. These are just fundamental things in the universe, which are kind of common everywhere in the universe. So David Chalmers suggests that consciousness was always there. As soon as the universe was created, consciousness came into being. as a fundamental force
Mhm.
of the universe. And I think that's right. I think consciousness is it is transcendent to the human brain. It's something which exists all around us as a kind of force or
Mhm.
quality.
Mhm.
And it was always there. I think consciousness is the source of all physical things.
Mhm.
I think the physical world emerges from consciousness. And the role of the brain is to transmit consciousness. The brain, I think, is like a radio transmitter that receives the consciousness that is all around us and transmits it into our own being.
Professor Laszlo, he was a guest on my show last summer, I think. He refers to it as the universal information field. And again, with the idea that it is a force all around us that with which we can connect and we can align with for our benefit. And to me, that fits so well. Before I even started learning about consciousness or the things we talk about on my show these days with my guests, in shamanism, they talk about these unseen forces, and the indigenous were completely comfortable with and practiced at
Mm. Yeah,
aligning themselves with that.
exactly. Yeah. I read a book called The Fall, which came out in about 20 years ago now. And I surveyed a lot of indigenous groups around the world. And I found that every indigenous group that I found had a term for some form of some kind of spiritual force, some kind of all-pervading spiritual energy. I guess the Native Americans refer to it generally as the Great Spirit. But
Mm-hmm.
every indigenous culture around the world has some equivalent term that could be translated as universal energy or the force that moves all things. And I think that they were referring to this essential consciousness that's everywhere around us. I think they could perceive it as an everyday reality, whereas we seem to have lost awareness of it. I think we sometimes gain awareness of it in altered states of consciousness, in spiritual
Mm-hmm.
experiences, for example, but it's not a part of our day-to-day reality anymore, as it probably was for indigenous peoples.
Well, I have a couple of questions to that. First of all, I'd love to read that book. Second, it seems as though, and this is being a little bit perhaps cliche, surrounded by the technological stimulation, we've occupied ourselves with so many things that are strictly brain inside the human head brain. We have applied our awareness to that so much. It occupies that. And that's
Mm,
why, and you can speak to this if you would, to me, one of the, and it's not my original idea, but be out in nature, be silent, feel
mm,
what's around you,
yeah.
because that overstimulation that exists literally in our brain and only in our brain has really shut that world, that transcendent world out, hasn't it?
I agree. I think it is largely because of the kind of associational chatter that we have in our minds. When our attention isn't occupied by entertainments or by the tasks of our jobs or our hobbies,
Mhm.
it tends to fill with this restless associational chatter, thoughts about the future, about the past, and
Mhm.
so on. And I think that chatter kind of blocks out, this innate sensibility, this spiritual awareness. And that's why, I think one of the roles of meditation is to quieten the thought chatter.
Mhm.
Yeah, and in meditation, you can gain a sense of, the spiritual force that's around you. That's why in meditation, after meditation, there's often a feeling of connection to your surroundings,
Mhm.
especially to natural phenomena. And in states of deep meditation, there's a sense of oneness with everything around you, or a sense of oneness with a, fundamental consciousness or spiritual force, which is somehow manifest within your being. So yeah, I think, this restless thought chatter, which is stimulated by information and by our hectic modern lives, I think that is largely responsible for our alienation from spirit.
I was talking this is to my to my hairdresser the other day, and she's raising three kids, 11 and 4 and younger. And they're constantly going from one extracurricular activity to the other.
Hmm.
And she said it got to be too much. She had to decide one night they're not going to go do something, they're going to be at home. And I said, I don't think we give our children enough experience in simply being within themselves, in
Hmm.
being quiet, in being reflective, in feeling our emotions, feeling our connectedness. Um, yeah, and it just felt like,
I agree.
maybe that's what, having people like you on my show can help do is help people see that not doing, again, a cliche,
Hmm.
but not doing is actually really, really, really important.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I sometimes call it the disease of doing. It's kind of it thoroughly infected modern life, which is a terrible shame because I think life really exists in being. In its
Mhm.
most fulfilling form, life manifests itself in being. And being is also really productive. There's this kind of false idea that in order to be productive, you have to be busy all the time. You keep
Right,
doing, fill
right.
every moment of your day. Don't bother sleeping because I actually saw some self-help guru the other day on the internet. He was saying, I've been missing out sleep for years and years, but it's made me more productive because I've managed to fill my days with more activity. But that's a completely false idea because actually, creativity emerges from being. The best ideas emerge from being. And that's actually true of a lot of inventions. They've arose when people were relaxing or
Hmm.
daydreaming, or sleeping or
Hmm.
meditating. So I think especially if you want to be a creative person, you have to fill your days with being rather than filling them completely with doing.
So, one of the things that I struggle with as a physician in my rural clinic, and it's usually women, not always, but usually, who are challenged by something of stresses in their life, and they have done for their family, they've been doing and doing and doing, and to actually take time for themselves. And I was talking with this one woman, and she's in her late 70s. And I said to her, I said, sometimes that quiet time is when your body gets to heal. And
Definitely.
and I said, so we look at it, and that's the Puritan ethic, got to work,
Yeah,
got to produce, got to, I said, we look at it as if you're doing nothing. But I said, your cells, your actually inner life needs that. And she said, so I guess I've been doing everything for everyone else and I haven't done enough for myself. And I thought, well, she hit the eureka. And I
yeah,
said, that just quiet that and your body will thank you. Your mind will thank you because that's your
definitely.
time for healing.
Mm.
And
Yeah,
you could see her challenge because she was probably brought up. This is um, central Pennsylvania farmers, and she was probably brought up. You get up, you got, go out to the barn, you do your chores, you keep going, you come into eating and keep on going. And anyway, it's a
mm.
very big challenge, isn't it?
It is. But yeah, I mean, one of the awful things about it is that people become alienated from their true selves. You need to spend time alone doing nothing in order to find your true self and in
To
order
know
to
who you are. Hmm.
cultivate your true self. Yeah.
Hmm.
And and if you don't spend time alone doing nothing, you kind of build up a false identity. You derive an identity from your activity and from your achievements.
Hmm.
And it's not your real identity, and therefore there is a disconnect between your false identity and your essence. And over time, that disconnect can grow wider and wider. And I think some people, particularly when they're older, when they maybe reach middle age, this disconnect is so wide that it causes a crisis, some kind of
Mm-hmm.
breakdown.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's one of the manifestations of a midlife, the so-called midlife crisis.
Mm-hmm. So we talked a little bit about mind and the recognition that if we make it totally as brain function, that can be limited. But if we have a mind that connects to the transcendent, connects to the universal consciousness, can we talk a little bit, either emotionally or physically, how can that help us heal?
When we connect to a transcendent spiritual quality, it opens us up. Our boundaries become soft, and we transcend separateness. And in my view, a lot of psychological and some physical conditions which arise from psychological uh, uh, expressions, they are caused by separateness, by a sense of separateness.
Mhm.
It's when we feel that we are totally enclosed within our bodies and minds, and the rest of reality is out there on the other side,
Mhm.
disconnected from us. On one level, that causes psychological anxiety. It causes a sense of incompleteness, a sense of what I call ego isolation. And you also feel threatened by the world because you're separate from it. And and I think some physical conditions can arise from that sense of anxiety and incompleteness. But when our boundaries become soft, we connect with we connect with the world again. We lose that sense of isolation, and there's a sort of a warm feeling of connection, a kind of radiant feeling of connection to nature, to the world in general, an empathic connection to other beings, other human beings, and other living beings, and everything becomes more harmonious because it arises from a sense of connection. Our
Mhm.
minds become less busy. Our bodies are more relaxed. There's less tension and stress within us. So life becomes much more harmonious in that state. And also, we're open to a lot of experiences as well. We're open to creative. We become open to creativity.
Mhm.
We become open to spiritual experiences, open to psi phenomena. We become more compassionate. We become more open to other people's experiences that we can sense. So life becomes a lot richer and in a general sense, much more harmonious.
I'm gonna, for the listeners, I'm gonna just put in a corollary or translate that to the idea of the energy body and our boundaries, and just reflect that in order to be self-protective, in order to be an individual, we have an energy body with boundaries, and we keep those boundaries often in toxic situations, and that's important, and that's self-protective. But as you say, when we soften, or if I use shamanic and energy medicine language, if we allow our energy field to resonate with the universal field, consciousness, all that is, we actually align ourselves with these forces of the universe that maybe don't even have names yet, that science can't explain. And we gain immense power. And as you say, we tap into the creative well, we get inspiration. And especially for me, anyway, because I'm such a strong proponent of nature, I live in a very rural setting, which I love.
Hmm.
When we connect with other animals, with the trees, with the plants, we're connecting with universal forces such as life force, vitality, the very stuff that is the motor oil for our engine. Um,
Hmm.
and so when we think about, and I'll just share for the listeners when we talk about our energy fields, we need to open up in order to align with bigger things. And
Hmm.
sometimes we name those angels, we call those elves, we might call them dragons, we might call them God, whatever. But that's important fuel for our
Yeah.
existence as a human, isn't it?
Mm. I think that's why so many humans love to spend time in nature.
Hmm.
I went into the countryside a few days ago here in England. I went to a place called the Lake District, and it was so busy with people. At first, I thought, "Oh wow, I want to be alone. I don't want to be bothered with all these people." But I thought, "No, this is great. It's great that so many people are here wanting to reconnect." I think everybody comes out into the countryside to reconnect. They're not maybe not consciously aware of it, but they want that feeling of reconnection to something greater than themselves. And they want the stillness, the freshness and
Hmm.
stillness of nature as well.
I don't think there's anybody who walks on a forest path in the trees who can't, who doesn't genuinely feel better.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Even if they're not consciously aware of it, they come
Right.
home and they feel
Mhm.
better, that they
Right.
feel more relaxed. They feel more attuned to something beyond themselves, and that's why we love it. I love the Japanese term, forest bathing, the Japanese
Mm,
concept of forest bathing. You know,
I could do that. Hmm.
Yeah, to me that explains exactly what it's like. If I walk through a forest, I feel like I'm bathing in the greenness, in the rich,
Hmm.
deep
Hmm.
greenness of the forest. I can feel it seeping into me, relaxing me, attuning me, refreshing me.
Hmm.
And yeah, and I come home, I feel like I've just had a beautiful warm bath. I feel totally relaxed and whole.
Yep, I love that. So I want to shift a little bit and talking about time expansion. You've written a new book, Time Expansion Experiences. Tell us about this book and the general concepts.
It's about altered states of consciousness when time shifts. In some altered states, time can expand massively, so that a few seconds can seem like minutes.
Hmm.
And I guess that one of the most common situations is accidents. A lot of people report that when they have an accident, maybe a cut in a car or maybe a fall, they report that time seems to stretch out massively and they feel like they have more time to respond to the situation, to take
Hmm.
some preventative action of some form. And people often say that the time expansion saved them. It maybe even saved their lives because they had more time to prevent an accident or to prevent injury. But they can also happen in states of deep stillness or presence and spiritual experiences. They can also happen in near-death experiences. When in a near-death experience, a person may be clinically dead for just a few seconds or a few minutes, but in their mind and their subjective experience, they've been through hours or days of really intense, fascinating experiences. And I also investigate what I call time cessation experiences, which is when time doesn't just expand, it actually disappears. It ceases to exist. And I guess it connects to what we were talking about nature as well. I mean, a lot of people say that when they spend time in nature, time sort of stretches out or seems to
Hmm.
disappear because of the stillness and the presence. So
I'd
it
like
basically shows.
to, I
Sorry.
want to extend that to um, a discussion of healing. And so I'll talk for just a minute. Because I remember in my shamanic training, my teacher would always say the shaman steps outside of space and time. And um, I was always like, okay, what does that mean? And when I think about it, when I think about trying to help people shift their belief, if they stay on that logical linear track of A is going to go to B and then it has to go to C, and they're in this reality defined by this materialism and logical,
Mm, mm.
and therefore there is no other option but me dying because I have cancer.
Yeah,
And so it is basically a runaway train heading for doom, in my opinion.
yeah.
But when you, and this is what I think is the experience that I learned in training with shamanism, is stepping outside of that or believing that you do not have to be linked to that one destiny line. And when you step outside of it, and I'm going to just posit this and you give me your thoughts,
Hmm.
if we can feel or align ourselves with all there is, are we not more likely to recognize that another reality could easily exist, perhaps in parallel fashion, that
Hmm.
we don't have to bind ourselves to this doomsday scenario?
Yeah,
Tell me your thoughts.
I agree. I mean, I think accidents are really interesting, like car accidents, for example, because people don't normally consider this, but they do shift us into an altered state of consciousness. When you have a car crash and suddenly time seems to slow down, suddenly sound seems to disappear, suddenly you're in a state of intense calmness, thinking rationally and logically. You're actually in an altered state of consciousness. You've stepped outside the normal
Mhm,
human state of consciousness. And as soon as you step outside our normal consciousness, everything changes. Time changes, your perception of your surroundings changes, your subjective experience, your sense of identity changes. You're in a different reality. And it's not a hallucination. In some ways, it seems more real. It definitely seems more real than what we call normal reality. And in this reality, in this alternate reality, different laws apply. Um, and so I think essentially when people have this experience during accidents, they're touching into the same expansive state of consciousness that people may experience in spiritual experiences or in near-death experiences. And it's a glimpse into a transcendent reality. And it's quite strange, really, that a lot of people who have accidents, they describe it in almost spiritual terms.
mhm,
And it can be, it can be a powerful experience of oneness, an experience of powerful well-being. And even though a person may be actually close to death,
mhm.
but even that itself, even proximity to death can be paradoxically a very beautiful, liberating experience. A lot of people emerge from these experiences no longer afraid of death because they feel that they've glimpsed death and they found that it's a liberating, even blissful experience.
Yeah, and they talk about, many of them talk about they were connected with this, basically this oneness field, this unity field,
Mm.
and everything was okay, even
Yeah,
even as they were dying.
yeah, that's
Hmm.
right.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's almost as if there is this transcendent spiritual realm in which everything is one, in which love or bliss is the essence of reality. It seems to be around us all the time, but under normal circumstances, we're unaware of it. Our normal consciousness seems to disconnect us from this field of love and oneness. But in certain alternate states of consciousness, we can connect to it.
So, how would you counsel people and our listeners to work towards tasting, connecting with this, touching on this ability in order to have more expansive, enriched life?
In my view, to refer to time specifically, our normal sense of time is produced by our sense of separation. Um, and the softer our boundaries become, the
Mhm,
more expansive time becomes. So any practice or activity that makes our boundaries softer and which may even dissolve our boundaries so that we feel a sense of oneness, then that will, on the one hand, it will expand time, but it will also maybe more significantly bring us into oneness and harmony with the rest of reality and with other beings, and even beyond normal reality. So I mean, so I recommend we talked about contact with nature. Contact with nature is a really effective practice of softening your boundaries
Mhm.
and, transcending the limitations of normal consciousness. But also meditation, I think any form of meditation helps as well.
Well, you
Um,
know what's interesting? I've been bringing now for about a year, I've been bringing guests on who talk about consciousness and the ability to basically expand our reality. And everyone, and I mean that to the one, meditates. Not
mm.
and not in a ashram or Tibetan monk fashion, but in some kind of mindfulness, quiet practice.
Mm.
And every one of them talks about how expanded they've become, how blissful, how joyful, how much increased their creativity is. Every
Yeah.
single one of them, even though they're walking the human world completely doing tasks and accomplishing things. They're not off sitting under a tree blissing out. They're actually getting stuff done.
Mm.
But every single one has said that. So I'm asking
Yeah.
myself, as a person who always said, "Oh, I can't do that. I can't sit still. Oh, I can't do that. I can't sit still." Um, and I'll share this story with you because I guess I'm sort of shocked at the power it had. I just happened to I had read Once Upon a Time Autobiography of a Yogi by Yogananda.
Oh, yeah. Very
And
good.
then I got on the website, the Ananda website, and there was a 13-minute, and that's a big deal for me, 13 minutes, short enough that I don't go nuts in my human crazy type A head. And I did that, and literally, probably in the first time I did it, if not in the next two or three times, I was more able to handle my busy work schedule at the
Mm.
clinic, more able to let the chaos and the drama of the people around me roll off. Um, really, really was transformative.
Yeah.
And I was so shocked by it because I've been, I'm probably older than you are, but I've been many years saying, "Oh no, there's no way I can sit still. I'm not going to sit still. Are you kidding? Oh my God, too boring. I got stuff to do." But and it hooked me.
Yeah.
And it hooked me because of the peace that came over me.
Mm. Mm.
And and so when I say to people, take me as I'm the poster child of the smoker who would never quit. And 13 minutes, even this crazy type A accomplishing person who works and goes to work at 5 in the morning, you know,
Hmm.
13 minutes. But
13
the
minutes.
benefits were incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember a time in my life. I learned about meditation when I was quite young, but like you used to do, I found it really difficult just to sit still. I couldn't do it. My mind was too busy. I felt as I had too many things to do. But I remember one time when I was going through quite a depressive phase in my life. I didn't really know where I was going or didn't really know who I was. And something inside me remembered the meditation technique I'd learned years ago, years previously.
Mhm,
I was probably in my mid-20s at the time when I was going through this depressive phase. And I just sat down to meditate, and immediately this sense of calm came over me. And I remember these 15 minutes of meditating, and it was the only time within this period of my life when I felt happiness, when I felt attuned to myself.
mhm,
So, it really stood out in my mind as a really significant experience, these 15 minutes of happiness in the midst of this long period of depression.
mhm.
And then a couple of years later, maybe 3 or 4 years later, I began to really attune to meditation. I went into a happier phase of my life and I did become able to meditate regularly and everything began to stabilize then. I became much more productive, much more creative, and, much, much happier.
Yeah, and I also found my stress over trying to control the drama of, well, COVID about did me in, treating people, the idea of COVID, the thought forms and fear around it and all of that. But um, to find that I could handle it and have equanimity. But what I want to say again, for those of you out there who think you can't do it, you just heard Dr. Steve say 15 minutes and I said 13. You don't have to do this for 3 hours a day. You don't have, it is 15 minutes of self-care that are exponentially more beneficial than the actual 15 minutes you spend doing it.
Yeah. It goes back to time. Those 15 minutes can stretch out as well. Well, sometimes meditation passes really quickly. Sometimes it stretches out. 15 minutes can seem like an hour. Because again, you're going beyond normal consciousness, you're going beyond normal boundaries, and you're stepping into a different reality, a different time world.
And
But
that's
I often, sorry,
sorry.
I was just going to say, I often tell people who find it difficult to meditate that meditation is not just about sitting on the floor with your legs crossed, closing your eyes. There are lots of active forms of meditation that you can practice. Like if you practice it in the right way, running or swimming can be a form of meditation. It's just an active form of meditation. If you run and focus your attention on your surroundings or on your body, if you swim and give your whole attention to your movement in the water, it can be very effective as a meditation.
I think Thich Nhat Hanh, if I'm saying his name correctly, the Vietnamese monk, he talked about that, just even walking,
Yeah, especially
But
walking in nature.
we have a couple of minutes left. So, Steve, if you would tell the listeners how they can check up on you, see the books that you've written, connect with you, if you'll share your website and some basic information, that'd be great.
Sure. My website is stephenmtaylor.com. That's Stephen with a V, M for Mark, stephenmtaylor.com. Unfortunately, there are so many Steve Taylors that I couldn't get stevetaylor.com or stevetaylor.co.uk. I often get confused with other Steve Taylors. But yeah, on my website, there is lots of information about my new book, Time Expansion Experiences, and my other books. And I regularly run online courses too, based on my books, so people can get information about those or follow me on social media.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for taking time to be with us today. It was wonderful hanging with you and learning and talking about the things I love. And if everybody will check out stephenmtaylor.com and his book, Spiritual Science, his new book, Time Expansion Experiences, and many other books. Dr. Steve, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me. It was really great. I enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
You've been listening to Maximum Medicine Radio with Doc Martin. Tune in next time while the doc talks health, spirituality, and the impact your beliefs have on every part of who you are, body and soul. Doc Martin unpacks the challenges we face as human beings and teaches callers to open the door between the scientific and the mystical. To learn more about Doc Martin and Maximum Medicine, visit www.sharonmartinmd.com.